I've tried to set the stage. Jesse Hawken's going to join us now. We're going to talk about this a little bit more. Jesse's the host of the Junk Filter podcast. A different title. He's a swell guy. He was on 49th Parahell a few weeks ago to talk about Doug Ford. He's joining the call right now. Let's see. Here's always the moment where it's never clear whether I'm going to do it properly. Jesse, hello. You're on mute. I think you're muted. Yeah.
Hi, Rob.
Hey. Jesse Hawken. Yes, I can. Jesse Hawken, everybody.
Hi, everyone.
Thanks for coming on the show, Jesse. How's it going? What's up?
Good. How are you? I'm glad to be here.
Yeah.
I'm currently rationalizing the idea of Prime Minister O'Toole.
Oh yeah? Okay. I'm not quite there yet. I still feel like this is a mirage. I feel like this O'Toole momentum. I think it's a mirage still. Are you starting to get nervous about this?
I'm just a little bit nervous because there's been no pushback so far. Like there seems to be some weird consensus of O'Toole mania, which concerns me. I also am aware that there is always a fake horse race narrative, and this is part of that. You know, the idea that it's not a fait accompli for Trudeau, that, you know, O'Toole might be the refreshing change we all need. I don't know whether or not Trudeau's doing some rope-a-dope thing where he's letting O'Toole get a false sense of confidence. Also, in races, you want to come from behind, so it's a good idea to let O'Toole be in the lead.
You're probably right, but I highly doubt, though, that they planned on following this much on their face at the beginning of this election. Like that's one thing that I think has caught everyone off guard.
Yeah, but I'm nervous, and I'm trying to think of like good outcomes to like O'Toole winding up, because I don't think he'll get a majority, even if he does win. There's also a possibility that Trudeau will do a number, like if it's a very close race in terms of seats, that Trudeau's probably got an easier road of putting a coalition together than O'Toole does. And that's his right as the incumbent.
Yeah, that's right. So even if the Conservatives win more seats than the Liberals, because of the way that our democracy works for all the Yankees watching, Justin Trudeau in that case would still have the first opportunity to form a government, which would require forming like a coalition with the NDP or with the other parties, which I imagine they'd probably just be more than happy to pass off to the Conservatives. In that case, we'll see.
And this is what his dad did in 1979.
Yeah,
Joe Clark got a minority. The Liberals were going to get rid of Trudeau, but Clark tried to run his first minority, which was incredibly fragile, as if he had a mandate, and he got knocked out in a vote of confidence. And since Trudeau was still in position as the leader, he roared back in with a majority.
Yeah.
And a lot of nerds, Canadian political nerds, seem to think that Justin could do the same, give O'Toole a chance for a few months, and when it all goes south immediately, he could come roaring back. But that's based on the idea that Canadians want an election.
Which it seems like they really don't, judging from the results that we've seen so far, just for the early polling and stuff. This seems to be like the major miscalculation here, right? That they thought they had a new majority sewn up. If they didn't think that, then they would not have called this election. I think we all understand this. And it just seems like they really underestimated how cynical it obviously seems to everyone, and they're not able to like talk their way out of it or pretend that like this isn't just like a nakedly cynical ploy to increase their power. I also think that they seem to underestimate this kind of very fervent anti-Trudeau sentiment with a lot of these far right types. I don't think they realized the extent that something really kind of ugly was brewing over the last couple of years that we're seeing now in these protests outside of liberal events, right?
And I also think they forgot to factor in another factor, which is for the last 15 or 16 months, everybody's gone insane.
Yes.
Like
Absolutely.
we're all cuckoo bonkers. We're
Yeah.
all cuckoo bing bong now. We've all lost our minds.
Not me.
We're
I'm
all
normal,
really,
but
well, no, me too. But we're all mad, and we want to lash out at someone. And I think Trudeau banked on the idea that we're all angry at conservative provincial leadership and that we're going to take it out on them, because so much of what has gone south has been the management in conservative run provinces
yeah,
of
like
the
with Doug
pandemic.
Ford and Brian Pallister and Jason Kenney, like they've completely bungled this at every step of the way.
So I also thought that too. The
Yeah.
first day or two
Same.
after they called the election, I was like, "Oh, this is pretty smart." Because here's one thing though, before I get carried away. One thing that I think is good about this election being called is there was all this bullshit brinksmanship about vaccine passports and everything, and all these obstinate conservative premiers playing chicken with the virus and pretending that they don't have the power to put a vaccine passport system, if you want to call it that. And once Trudeau called the election, all of a sudden, all the provinces started to fall in line. And that has to happen. It needs to happen. So
Yeah.
when people say that this election is unnecessary, I think one thing that's good about it is that it's forced the hand of a lot of conservative premiers that had been trying to make it all look like Trudeau's fault. Now they're not doing that anymore.
Yeah,
Even
absolutely.
Ontario has caved in.
Yeah, and that's one thing I'm happy about Quebec, where I've been talking about this a little bit lately, just how in Quebec there is this kind of innate sense of like social democracy, even when we have right wing like racist shitheads in charge.
Yeah.
Still, people in this province still seem like, even though there's of course there's all kinds of cranks and weirdos, but people do seem like pretty on board with doing this kind of thing, like vaccine passports. We have a very high vaccination rate, both in terms of like medical personnel and just like average citizens.
Mm-hmm.
That's one thing that I'm happy that they've kind of led the way on. It's kind of forced the hand, I think, of other conservative
Did
premiers.
you download the Quebec one, the app? Have you done it yet?
No, no, I didn't.
I was wondering what the interface is like.
No,
Because
no, because it
here,
goes into effect. Yeah,
oh, I thought you could download the app now. I thought it was in action now.
maybe you can. I'm not sure. I haven't looked into it. I never go out anyway, so it's not like I need it at the moment.
But here in Ontario, our government has been expecting that we'll all be happy with like a little thermal piece of printed thermal paper that says I got vaccinated that I'm supposed to carry around with me everywhere.
Yeah, yeah,
Ontario is supposedly the leading edge of technology, and
yeah, of course.
because of this stupid ideological argument over vaccines, uh, they're not doing it, and they have been refusing to do so. And then all of a sudden, once the election was called, Doug magically announced that indeed we're going to be having a vaccine
Okay,
identification system.
okay,
So that has been, that little game has been ended by the fact that the election's happening.
okay. So apparently
One
the
thing,
app came out on Android today, so I'm gonna get that. Very
yeah.
slick, very user friendly, easy to set up. Good to know.
But here's one thing that I wanted to ask you, Rob. I always thought that the sort of natural health anti-vaccine sort of mentality was kind of a lefty thing for the longest time in my life. And now it seems to be the preserve of hardcore right-wingers.
Well, I mean, it seems like that's definitely how that stuff started. Like when I think of like the anti-vaccine movement, I think more about like the yoga moms, like in California and
Mm-hmm.
like in San Diego and these kind of places, these kind of well-to-do, the wellness community, which does lean very
Yeah.
liberal. But one thing, and that's still a thing. Like there's still a sizable contingent, I think, that are part of that. But also, what has happened is just now that everything gets filtered through this culture war lens, right? Now it just seems like, oh, there's liberals in charge and they want you to take a vaccine, so the right wingers should just be opposed to it uniformly.
Yeah.
And that's something that's kind of new, I think, that's emerged over the last couple of years. So definitely there's still that element of the wellness community that are people that are the most resistant to this. But because now there's this endless kind of culture war pipeline for every single thing that ever happens, it seems like that's what's driving that. And that's why you have all these conservatives now just like lining up outside the pet feed store to just get fistfuls of horse deworming paste.
Have you seen that they've had a run on that shit in Alberta?
I did see that. Yeah. Yeah, they can't keep it on the shelves.
I love the fact that the do your research crowd is now buying horse dewormer.
Rather than take the free and widely available vaccine. Well, I know, and that's the thing. It's like, especially when you go to America too, and they kind of use this kind of logic of, well, it hasn't been approved by the
The
FDA,
FDA.
and then once it does approve it, it's like that's more evidence that you shouldn't trust it. And it's like, okay, well, there's pretty much nothing that anything can happen to get you to want to take this vaccine, is there?
Or the fact that all these guys who are so anti-vax have all been vaccinated. They all got polio
Oh,
shots
sure,
and
yeah,
tetanus shots.
yeah,
And their excuse for that is, oh, but that's because we know the science behind those vaccines. We don't know anything about
yeah,
the mRNA vaccine, which, by the way, has been in development for almost 20 years after SARS.
yeah, yeah, exactly. It's not that difficult to figure out how this has worked.
One
Although
way
it's,
that
it's funny because there's these conservative elites that you can tell that they're fear mongering about the vaccine while they've all taken it themselves. But then there's this lower tier of conservative radio hosts who I guess believe all the stuff that they say about this stuff, and they're just dropping like flies.
I keep
Something
waiting for
else.
Joe Warmington to drop dead. Warmington,
In
Joe Warmington
Minecraft.
is one of our heroic Toronto Sun
Yes.
disinformation peddlers. I think he really believes it, though. I'm
Okay.
positive that he hasn't actually been vaccinated. He's always, anytime there's any kind of issue, like the millisecond that they started wondering about side effects for AstraZeneca, he picked up he started tub thumping about how this is an untested, dangerous vaccine.
Yeah.
But when everything was going well and there were hundreds of thousands of people getting their shots, and that big thing at the Rogers Center in Toronto where like 25,000 people got vaccinated, he just was laying low and being quiet. So he only says what he really thinks whenever there's any bad news about the vaccine.
You can count on me.
Otherwise, he
and
just
have good
is
old
quiet
Rob
and
to
tries
talk you
pretend
through all
that
this.
he's vaguely supportive of it.
Yeah, as Dunstable Ramsey in the chat's pointing out, the citizen zero of Ford Nation. That is true. What about Sue Ann Levy? Did she take the vaccine?
She's retired now. She actually took she left the Toronto Sun to become an actor.
Yeah.
She said she's gonna wait till she finds out that she has to work with liberals who are all in the arts.
That's gonna be very upsetting for her.
But no, I don't know what's going on with her. She probably got vaccinated.
Probably.
My other hero, Brian Lilly, has definitely been vaccinated.
Okay.
Because he's constantly they want you to think two things at once, that this virus is nothing to worry about, more people die of the flu, and we need to close the borders because the deadly virus might get into our country.
Yeah, exactly. We have a lot of that cognitive dissonance as well in the US as well when you talk to these guys. That's it. We don't really have that same infrastructure of weird lunatic conservative commentators that the States does.
Mm-hmm.
This kind of lower tier of guys you've never heard of that apparently have these huge platforms, and have apparently kind of started to believe all the wacky stuff that their movement leaders have been saying for a while. We don't really have that to quite the same extent here.
Not yet. And that's
Not
what
yet. Yeah.
spooks me a little bit about in some provinces in Ontario, we have plenty of these people.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this is this has been the concerning thing for me, is that ever since Trump was elected and then immediately followed by Doug Ford, I've been waiting for the other shoe to drop in Canadian politics. When are we going to have this big national, far right wing populist movement? I just feel like we're always 5 to 10 years behind the States in these political trends. We've got the Canadian Obama right now. So just from that basic math, it's I've just been waiting for, when is this going to really emerge? And that's been kind of one of the surprising things about the last couple of years, is that it hasn't really, but over the course of this pandemic, it kind of has started to emerge. And even though O'Toole, I just feel Aaron O'Toole, the Conservative Party leader, he's just got zero charisma. He's got nothing going on. He sucks. He doesn't really have, I don't feel like he doesn't have the juice to be one of these big populist guys. But that's the thing that I've noticed, especially in the early days of this campaign, which is that there's this really ugly far right movement that's been building, and regardless of whether the conservatives are ready to harness that or not, these people are ready, and they're now that this election has been called, they're ready to come out. They're protesting all these Trudeau events. So the movement is there. I don't think there's anyone there to really steer it in any kind of direction yet. But we do see that the undercurrent there has been building for a while and is starting to really finally emerge.
We have a situation that's pretty deadly in this country, which is a problem in America, which is that idea of stochastic terrorism and stochastic violence.
Yeah, yeah.
That a leader will not go all the way up and say it into a microphone, but they will also not do anything disciplinarian about all the people. Like they send out this sort of messaging that gets taken to heart by psychos, but they haven't actually commissioned anybody to do any damage. Like they have plausible deniability.
Yeah, plausible deniability. Yeah.
So like a guy like Aaron O'Toole will say something like, well, we believe that those decisions should be left to the individual and for them to worry about their own health choices. Because what he wants is twofold. He doesn't want to lose what he hasn't already lost to the People's Party, who are strongly anti-vaccine.
Yeah.
And he also wants to bring a few of those people back. I think one reason why he's not in a majority position right now is because 5% of the vote is sitting with Maxime Bernier. He has something like 5%. The complete lunatic fringe on the right, they all think that Aaron O'Toole is Pierre Trudeau with no hair.
Yeah,
they think that he's a globalist. They
he's
think
like a
that
secret
he's
lib,
a liberal, because he doesn't hate the darkies as much as Maxime Bernier does.
Yeah. Or he just doesn't use he still speaks in dog whistles, really, rather than like Bernier. They've just like given up on using this kind of rhetoric, and they just openly say the racist and vile things they believe, rather than just like alluding to it gently, you know?
I think before the residential schools nightmare opened up in the news earlier this year, that it took one of Aaron O'Toole's big weapons away, which was that he was going to all the statues being torn down took another weapon away, that he was going to go after political correctness.
Yeah,
and
the culture war.
How we have to,
cancel
the culture war, and how, if you really want to get under a liberal skin, you tell them that Trudeau built residential schools. That's a good way to shut these liberals up. And he's not allowed to say shit like that in this state, right?
Rightfully
Even though,
so.
but at the same time, you could totally go after Trudeau for his lack of action on these files. And you can go after Trudeau for like doing nothing about the boil water advisories, but suing the shit out of the survivors of residential schools who are taking him to court. These are all sins, and no political party really has their hands clean enough to go after Trudeau on that, least of all the Conservatives.
Yeah, absolutely not.
Like Aaron O'Toole would not do anything about it either.
No, of course not.
But he doesn't say that he's going to, and that's the difference between him and Trudeau.
Yeah.
That's why Trudeau's been such a disappointment for so many.
I think this does lead to the really like kind of scary thing at this moment now, which if this does happen, again, I'm not panicking yet, but if we do in this moment of like the coming climate crisis in the middle of the pandemic now hand the reins over to this Conservative Party, I mean, it's going to be a fucking disaster for everyone.
Yeah.
That's the really kind of scary thing about this moment. I'm not ready to panic yet, but like the possibility now that this could go completely sideways. I mean, as much as I'm trying to like remain calm about it, it's still an absolute possibility, and would be a absolute fucking disaster for the country.
They're also going to be unbearably smug about it.
Oh yes.
They're going to be gloating. They're going to be bragging about how they knocked down the, Trudeau.
Yeah.
They've been trying to get him for so long. One of the big mistakes that they always make when they talk about Trudeau being, a girly man or a little child or a spoiled brat is that they keep losing to him. So what does that say about them?
That's true. Yeah. And I mean, that's one of the reasons why he called this election in the first place, right? Is because they don't have their shit together. And he just assumed naturally that like, well, they've got nothing going on. O'Toole sucks. They have no chance of winning, so I'm pretty safe to call this election, and it's probably going to be fine. But that's what I mean. It's like this undercurrent of this reactionary undercurrent kind of exists regardless of what the Conservative Party is doing, and that's the kind of big mistake that he's made here, right?
Mm-hmm. And I don't understand. Like, there's a side of me that thinks that if Trudeau can't handle this lightweight Aaron O'Toole, then he doesn't deserve to be the prime minister. I know what the consequences of that are, though.
Yeah, absolutely not. I mean, that's the one positive thing, is if they did lose this election to the Conservative Party, it would probably mean the end of his, maybe not his political career, but like his time at the top of the Liberal Party. Like, I don't know how he would continue on if that was the result. If he calls an election 18 months after the previous election and hands over power in that way, like, it would be a fucking disaster. And that would be one positive thing, is that we would at least be probably free of him for a little while.
It would also marginalize the liberals, because who do they have behind them? Nobody. Like, who's the next liberal leader? Chrystia Freeland?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
She's too teensy.
Yeah. That's what I was saying. If they lose
baggage of her on her own, so many people hate her even more than they hate him.
Yeah, which is amazing, because you'd think that conservatives would really like that her whole like Nazi lineage and propensity to post feet on Maine as well. Conservatives, you'd think that they would like that kind of stuff, but
yeah,
I can't figure these
people
out.
They're in this difficult position, aren't they, the conservatives? Because they want to call who they don't like Nazis, but they don't want to alienate their Nazi base.
Exactly. That's the tricky thing. Girl boss Freeland. That's right. We're doing toxic masculinity. Shitting on the
I'm
idea
happy
of a
to see the
woke
Green
girl
Party
boss.
self-immolating.
That's been fun too. Yeah, as well.
I've never trusted them.
No. With good cause.
They always seem to me to be a party that people say they're going to vote for to punish another party, as opposed to actually liking that party.
Yeah.
And now they find themselves in this terrible situation. Like, if they get out of here with one seat in Parliament, that'll be a victory.
Yeah, absolutely. And the leader, Enemy Paul, has no chance basically to win an actual seat in Parliament. She's basically been sabotaged. Is she in
downtown Toronto still?
Yeah.
Oh God. Yeah, and I live in a very, very interesting riding. I live in Davenport, which for the longest time was a liberal safe seat, perhaps the safest liberal seat in the country. It was Charles Caccia was the MP in this riding for like 30 years or something like that. In 2011, with the Jack Layton victory, it turned orange. And now it's a seesaw between the Liberals and the NDP for control of this riding. But in the last two federal elections, it's gone Liberal because of the party's very successful psyop to trick everyone in Toronto to vote Liberal to stop the Conservatives, who have no chance in hell in almost every riding in downtown Toronto.
Yeah.
But everyone voted Liberal because they didn't want to see Stephen Harper, or they didn't want to see Andrew Scheer. This time it may not work. If we're going by signs in the neighborhood, I see way more orange signs than red signs.
Okay. That's interesting.
So it's going to be very competitive.
Yeah. I live in a completely non-competitive Liberal riding. I live in Mark Garneau's riding. So
yeah,
pretty much zero chance. Pretty much zero chance that anyone else is going to win, which it's freeing for me because I can just kind of vote for whoever.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the thing, because like there's a lot to be nervous about when it comes to this. Obviously, like again, if we hand over the reins of the running this country to the Conservative Party in the middle of all these different crises, they couldn't, at their convention, they couldn't even agree on a resolution that said climate change is real. Like that was one of their main.
Yeah,
there's a pretty easy layup, right? We can show that we're moderate conservatives. We can agree that it's real, and they can't even do that. So it'd be not that it would be much worse than the Trudeau response to climate change, which there's been nothing so far, but there's a whole lot of reasons why it would be a really terrible turn. I guess that's the thing that I'm trying to tell people though, is that I'm not too swayed yet by this like movement in polling that we've seen. I really do think that even though this is unintentional, and I don't think the Liberals intended for any of this stuff, I do think that they're probably going to like overcompensate to this shift in the polling. They'll probably end up offering some big thing like a UBI, is what I outlined on Twitter, which I know that they've been kind of toying with for a while. This idea, when they did do the CERB, it was very popular. Before they took it away from people while the pandemic was still ongoing, but that's another thing.
Yeah.
And I think at the end of the day, probably the same thing will always happen, which is that a lot of people will be scared off by the idea of a conservative government, and they'll vote for the Liberal Party because they don't want conservatives to win. And I think probably the best case scenario that we're looking at is another minority government, which would be kind of hilarious if after all that's how it turned out, with some probably empty promises for some kind of big social democratic thing. That's probably the best case scenario, and like that may very well be like where we're headed for this.
Well, one thing that concerns me, I alluded to this earlier, is I think that Trudeau might have some weird rope-a-dope strategy going right now, where he's allowing the protesters to look like they are paid operatives from the Conservative Party. I think most of the people that are there wanting, holding up signs, hoping that Trudeau will be executed, are actually the People's Party weirdos and not necessarily the Conservative Party.
Yeah.
But the Trudeau team seems to be portraying it as an example of the extreme Trumpian right wing of conservatism in this country. And I think that that is a scare tactic to try to get liberals to sort of come back over, because they're thinking, oh, we don't want this country to turn into Donald Trump. I think it's a dangerous game, though.
Absolutely.
If that's what they're up to, if that's what they're trying to do, is to scare us all, that's been a very effective scare tactic for the longest time in this country. We used to have very incredible commercials for what would happen to Canada if Stephen Harper was to be prime minister, where they, talked about, it being like the War Measures Act all the time in Canada.
Yeah.
At some point, that trick's not going to work anymore. But this seems to be a new wrinkle to me, because all these people, protesters, are incredibly violent and scary, even though they're actually, they themselves would be knocked down very easily by a riot police if it came to that. They're pretty bourgeois for the most part. But I think
it's always been kind of a fake populist movement, like that Adamson barbecue guy. Like they pretend to be working class, but really they're like, real estate developer fail sons and wealthy suburban types.
And what they're really angry about is about the status quo that they're used to being breached. I mean, all those people are paying for $17 hot dogs from Adamson's barbecue, and they're acting like the aggrieved proletariat.
Exactly.
But it's a dangerous game. Like I've noticed that, for instance, Maxime Bernier has been very quiet during all of this.
Yeah.
And I also noticed the Conservative Party, who only 2.5 weeks ago were tweeting that video where they made Trudeau look like a little bratty girl, saying
from Willy Wonka,
no need for this kind of rhetoric. Has got to stop, and it has to stop now. Like dad telling the kids to behave in the back seat of the car.
Yeah, I'll turn this car around right now.
But it's total it's total hot dog guy. We're all looking for the guy who did this
absolutely
imagery, because like they're the ones who wind everyone up and get everyone to think that Trudeau is a dictator or a menace, when he's actually just a boring neoliberal.
Yeah.
But I worry a little bit that there's going to be an attempt on Trudeau's life, frankly.
Already has. I mean, there was that guy that drove his truck into Trudeau's house a year or two ago.
Yeah.
Full of guns and stuff. That kind of got swept under the rug, weirdly.
Well, didn't the Post write a piece about what a great guy he is, and how he's
of course,
a simple sausage salesman?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, I think you're right, but it's absolutely something that Trudeau is going to spin into, like being like, oh, I'm the underdog, like I'm the one that's being harassed, like I'm the victim of this stuff, and it's going to allow him, I think, to like campaign like that and avoid a lot of serious issues. Like he's going to be able to avoid his failures on climate. He's going to be able to avoid his failures on Indigenous rights and all these things. And he's going to be like, look at these crazy lunatics that are going to take over if you don't vote for the Liberal Party. And that's going to work for a lot of people, I think.
When I hear people on the right talking about how Trudeau's a fake feminist, I want them to shut the fuck up, because they don't even believe in feminism at all.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't want to hear criticism about Trudeau not being a real feminist from people who would be in favor of pro-life agendas.
Yeah, exactly.
You can count
I don't
on
want to
me.
hear too much about how it's
up
to the individuals in Canada to make their own health decisions from a party that is against medically assisted suicide and against pro-choice.
Yeah, exactly. It's my body, my choice. Cynical. Until it comes to these other things, then not so much.
Yeah, when they say shit like that, like my body, my choice, like these guys have terrible diets and they're telling me about the health risks of being vaccinated.
Yes. Yeah, it's not good.
But anyway, yeah, no. So I'm trying to rationalize what wouldn't be that horrible if Aaron O'Toole were prime minister with a minority government where he can't work with anyone and where it won't last, and where the pandemic, any moves that he's going to make to address any problems with the pandemic are going to be way bigger mistakes than anything Trudeau did, like running the country the way that Alberta and Ontario has handled the pandemic. Like there won't be much patience for it.
No.
I think the Liberals' best argument for being reelected is to get people to imagine how O'Toole would have handled the pandemic. Can you imagine O'Toole doing CERB, for instance?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's no way, like, the pandemic response from the federally has been a fucking not great, but it's been significantly better than what we've seen in the United States. There's been some good elements like the CERB, which I don't know if would not have happened either in a liberal majority government.
Maybe not. Maybe that happened because of the NDP's.
At least partially. I mean, it's one of the long history of. That's what I was saying earlier. Is like that's a big part of like what the NDP I think sees its role as is just like lobbing softballs to the Liberal Party and hoping that they connect on every now and then and do something good maybe, and then they end up obviously taking the credit for it. You know.
I want to go off on the NDP a little bit because I am an NDP supporter and I will be voting for them in this next election. And I've always voted NDP. And in downtown Toronto, they sometimes even win. Yeah. But they so disappoint me with how wishy-washy they are.
Yeah.
For them to be making a big issue about renters subsidies for rentals.
Yeah, exactly. Well,
what about building public housing?
Well, this is what I mean.
Why are you talking about like giving land? Like just the scam that I can see right off the bat if they were to subsidize rents is that the landlords would just jack up the rents.
Yeah, it's just a handout to landlords. This is what drives me crazy about it as well, and what I often complain about, and why I point out the need to have like other like further left parties as part of our discourse that shows people that there is an actual alternative to some of these ideas, where it's just like you have just like, you know, the Liberals offering up like a sort of moderate neoliberal policy. And then you have the NDP offering up like a what about that, but like maybe ever so slightly better. And in the scale of some of the crises that we're dealing with, the housing crisis, the climate crisis, like we shouldn't be dealing with these like little minor tweaks or like these like, you know, like sort of moderately more liberal version of what you're proposing. Like we need people proposing ideas that actually match the level of crisis that we're facing. No one is doing that. In our like federal parties that we talk about in our discourse, or that are included in the polling and in the debates and stuff like that, which is why I think it's important to have other viewpoints such as the Communist Party of Canada out there. Even if you don't agree with everything that they say, it's really important to have a viewpoint out there that's like offering up more radical solutions to a lot of these like big serious crises that we're looking at.
The NDP used to have leadership that was much more left than it is now.
Yeah.
Like in this day and age, if we still had a guy like Ed Broadbent, I know he's way too old now, but like he might have gotten a turn as prime minister because a lot of the NDP's policies in the 70s and the 80s have turned into centrist, you know, like they were vanguard ideas 30, 40 years ago, and now they seem to be accepted as sort of like basic ideas. So who knows how the NDP could have evolved as a party if they had gone in a natural direction. But at some point, they got tricked into thinking that they had to appeal to center-right voters.
Yeah.
That was Mulcair's big mistake in 2015.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like a stick in the chat just pointed out, Jack Layton. For as much as I like Jack Layton, seemed like a great guy, he did move the party right. And they achieved their biggest electoral success under Layton, basically trying to be a better version of the Liberal Party, and it was quite successful. But
and
I think
that
was
Trudeau did in 2015 with Layton being gone. He
ran to their left.
He took that role. Because the NDP got fooled into thinking that they had to peel away votes from conservatives. So that left the whole left of the field open for Trudeau to exploit. Yep. Even in this election, we see O'Toole making these sops towards sort of leftish ideas in some economic things that he can say anything he likes while he's running for office. He won't do any of it.
Yeah, like he proposed putting a law putting one worker seat on the boards of like major companies and stuff.
Yeah,
which will never happen. But
it'll never happen.
Yeah, but you can see how they're trying to appropriate some of that left wing language and get to Trudeau's left on some of these issues, which is incredible.
As a friend of mine said to me when we were younger, these words resonated in my head ever since. He was saying, do you think the NDP are popular in the West because everybody wants to see gay marriage and, affirmative action programs? It's because of the farm subsidies. They hate gay people. They hate minorities, but they vote NDP because of the economic reasons. And I think that one of the scary parts about modern conservative thought is that there are a lot of people who are working class whose votes have gone towards left and center left parties for a long time, but they themselves are reactionary people. And so parties like Harper and O'Toole have figured that out and are now throwing bones their way to get them to vote because it appeals to some level of their former NDP membership, but they're not really going to do it.
No. And I mean, even that's the thing, it's kind of a mirage too, that whole idea of like, even if you put a worker on the board of a major company, it's like, it's one seat, it means nothing. Like they won't actually have impact or any like democratic impact into the what this company is doing or the way it operates. It's purely just like a performative thing of like, that allows them to kind of like shore up their, working people bona fides, even though it wouldn't actually mean anything for working people.
And that quote unquote worker on the board will be appointed as well. It's not going to be like, it's not going to be anybody who actually represents the workers' position. It'll be a ceremonial seat.
Yeah.
Filled through patronage.
Yeah. Probably rubber stamping whatever the corporate agenda is.
And then that would be used against workers. They'd say, well, your worker on the board voted for it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess all this is to say that like, it's still very early. We got 3 weeks to go. I'm expecting like a lot of different changes. I'm not panicking yet about what the polling is doing right now.
Yeah.
But we're going to keep our eyes on this. And thanks for coming on and breaking this stuff down with me, Jesse. You have any, while we're still here, you have any like, any movie recs? You're a big movie mindset guy.
I'm a big movie mindset guy. Well, I can recommend that I just dropped an episode of my podcast, Junk Filter, on the Val Kilmer movie Spartan.
Yes. Yeah, the meme. Yeah.
And I will tease that my next episode is about the films of Andrew Dominic. And in particular, I would recommend anybody on this Twitch stream check out his movie with Brad Pitt called Killing Them Softly, which has...
Was that the one with Brad Pitt?
That's the one with these guys who rob a mafia card game. It's an allegory for the 2008 economic crisis.
Okay,
and it was the first American movie that offered a critique of Obama that didn't come across as right-wing or racist.
Okay, interesting.
It aged really well.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's a really good film, and it's a solid critique that people were angry at the time because it was a movie that dared to criticize Obama's, image, but it's aged so well. It is what we are all saying now about Obama being a disappointment.
Yeah.
But this movie did it in 2012 when it was not cool to say.
The name of the movie was Killing Them Softly.
Killing Them Softly, and I highly recommend it. That's
cool.
I'm going to be dealing with that on my next episode.
Cool. Junk Filter, it's a great pod. I enjoy it. We've been talking I'm going to do an episode eventually. We've been talking about it for like 6 months. Eventually we'll figure out a film to talk about on this podcast.
Can I tell the Twitch stream that the part that Rob and I were planning a show where we were going to get really wrecked and we were going to argue that Die Hard was a Christmas movie?
Yeah, exactly.
We should do that, actually.
Yeah, it's by the time we get around to it in a whole year, it'll be Christmas. So we'll do it again. Yeah.
But yes, we'll coming soon, Rob, to a podcast near me.
Yeah. Or we can talk about the Eddie Furlong film from 1995, Brain Scan.
Sure. I'm up for it.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks a lot, Jesse. It was good to talk to you. You're welcome to come back.
Thank you. I would love
for
to.
For some election correspondent stuff.
Are you doing election night coverage?
I am I'm certainly going to be doing election night coverage. It's a question of whether I'm going to be doing it here. I might have some possibilities on the horizon to do some semi-professional punditry on election night.
Beautiful.
So we're going to see how that goes.
Steal your thunder.
Yeah, we'll see how that goes. But either way, I'll certainly be doing a, if I don't do a live night, I'll be doing an election aftermath. So I'll get you on the panel.
Okay, wonderful.
All right, man. Thanks for taking the time. I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, and good night, everyone.
All right, good night. Bye-bye. Okay. Jesse Hawken, everybody.